Hi everyone, welcome to Modifying Mindsets in Middle School. My name is Anna Barnes. I'm a 7th grade math teacher at Aiken High School, and this presentation is about social emotional learning and different lessons and projects that you can use with your students. I use them with 7th graders during this school year in 2021 and 2022. But with adaptations, you probably will be able to use them with your own students in other grade levels. I want to start this presentation by talking about a quote from Principal Bill Waters, who works in the San Angelo School District in Texas. He was attending a school board meeting in which he was supposed to be presenting test scores, other data, successes that his school has experienced this year as just kind of a wrap up to the end of the year board meeting. But instead of presenting any of that, he actually kind of went rogue and started talking about the issues that his school has been experiencing and the way that the schools throughout the country have also shared these experiences and these problems throughout the post-pandemic year. So here's the quote. He said, "I believe that school will never be like it was prior to March of 2020. It has changed, and we have to make changes with it. This year, we have learned that many students struggle just to be students. We have seen an increase in mischief behavior and a decrease in grade level maturity. There is an increase in the number of students dealing with mental health issues. Unfortunately, we only know the tip of that iceberg, since all I can talk about are those that are willing to share what they are going through." In a recent RAND survey, schools and school districts stated that addressing mental health needs of both students and staff ranked higher than student engagement, student attendance, and declining enrollment. And if you want to watch more of that video or hear anything else that he brought up during that school board meeting, the link is provided below. So one of the things that motivated this project was that quote, the fact that we have more mischief behaviors and more misbehaviors in our schools throughout the country than what we had seen prior to the pandemic. And then another thing that motivated this project was a quote that I heard about how America is one of the loneliest countries in the world. So I found this article where they say we need to begin reimagining and reweaving our social relationships in healthcare, schools, and many other institutions. And later on, they go to say that schools should assure that every child is connected to a school adult. So right now we have schools where some students feel very alienated from the educational system, and they don't really feel like they have any adult support within the school building. And this article believed that that needs to change. So I want you to consider some important questions to kind of get started with thinking about the other things that were motivating these SEL projects and mini lessons that we were doing throughout this year in my classroom, because these are really things that I wanted to hit hard on when we were talking about some social and emotional issues. So the first question I have for you is, does a consequence or a loss of privilege equate to a temporary loss of love? So sometimes when a consequence is assigned, the adult also temporarily takes away love or caring for the student by yelling at that student or by ignoring them. And these actions sometimes actually escalate the situation by either provoking or triggering a student who is already feeling badly about themselves and about what they did, even if they're not really showing that they feel badly. It might also burn bridges with students and just make them feel more alone, like I was saying before, just alienated in their school community and alienated from education. The next question I have for you is give respect to get respect a popular yet problematic mindset? So many of my students and many of the adults working in my school building this year, as well as school buildings that I've been in the past, have this mindset, even though it is kind of faulty. So imagine this example of a teacher is in the hallway just walking by and sees a student just playing around in the hallway. The teacher uses a harsh tone to command a student who is messing around in the hallway to get to class. In the student's opinion, the teacher uses a disrespectful tone when interacting. The student then allows himself to get disrespectful in return and talks back. In the teacher's opinion, the student just became disrespectful, and the teacher now allows himself to get disrespectful as well. The teacher calls that student a sucker. The student calls the teacher something worse. So people who have this mindset allow themselves to get disrespectful anytime they decide that they have been disrespected. And it's really their own opinion and their own perspective. And most of the time it happens when the other party really didn't mean any disrespect at all. The last question that I want you to consider is, growing up, in your opinion, did you have an adult that you could trust and rely on for support in the long term? If so, can you imagine what it would be like to grow up without any reliable, trustworthy, and long-term support system like that? So think about the number of students who got in trouble during every class during the whole school year this year. Not having a single supportive adult in the school is probably going to alienate a student from that school setting and probably cause further problems down the road as well, just leading to a disconnect between the student and the education system. So we really need to focus on building connections in our school community through SEL. So if you are doing this training, you probably already have a good understanding of what SEL is, or just the basis of SEL. So SEL stands for Social Emotional Learning, and I'm just going to briefly remind you of some of the goals that SEL has. So the first one is to tackle social and emotional issues that students are experiencing or have experienced in the past, or also preventing the ones from happening in the future. So for the emotional aspect, that's really what interactions are happening inside of the student. So what are they thinking in their brain? What are they feeling in their heart? For the social aspect, that's really what's happening outside of the student. So that could be a student to another student. That could be an interaction between a student and an adult. It could be inside the school. It could be at home with their family members. It could be outside of the school with their friends. Another goal of SEL is to improve school culture. And then yet another one is to build up sympathy and empathy, so that way we can maybe try and create a better world altogether. And in this school year, the increase in misbehaviors have potentially stemmed from a combination of social media, things like TikTok, and the challenges on there. That was just one example, as well as the large lack of structure that the pandemic kind of provided for these students, which actually spanned multiple school years. So many staff are now struggling with a decline in school culture as a result. So that might be resolved if we can model and practice empathy and sympathy when we are thinking about SEL as well as behaviors in the building. So like I said, if you're here taking this training, you probably know the basic facts of SEL. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here. You can always research it a little bit more with a lot of the links that I've provided in the future slides of this presentation. But I just want you to keep in mind 5 objectives for students to be working on during SEL projects or lessons are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and relationship skills. So really just working on themselves as a whole person, working on how they handle things and how they deal with problems, and how they make choices. All right, so before I show you the actual projects that we did this year, I also want to just kind of give you an introduction to the setting and the layout of these projects. So the projects and mini lessons were used with Aiken 7th graders during this year, 2021 to 2022. And in a survey of my 31 students, 80% responded that they experienced improved outlooks, increased academic success, and or an improved closeness to peers after engaging in the SEL activities. And then Every material that I have in this presentation, every resource, anything that you might need from this presentation can be found either at that QR code at the top or the bit.ly link down there towards the bottom. The last thing you need to know about how these projects and lessons were taking place with SEL during the school year is that Aiken doesn't actually grade the same way a traditional school would grade. So since we are project-based, we are grading on 5 different areas. Only one of them has to do with the content that the students are learning. And the rest of the skills are real-life skills. So anytime we had an SEL project or an SEL lesson, I would give the students an agency grade, which basically was going back to those 5 pillars of SEL. So how were the students managing themselves? How were they making decisions? How are they aware of things going on? How are they communicating with others? So that agency grade was a really big part of how motivated students were to complete some of these projects. And that might be a little bit more difficult in traditional schools where they're just graded on the content alone. But you can kind of make that decision as a teacher whether you want to make any of these SEL projects for just like a content grade, because really it is kind of going along with the content. If we're problem solving, for example, in my classroom with my math students, if we're problem solving some social situation, then that is kind of going into the critical thinking of math. So the first project that we did was probably about January, February, and we called it the Vibe Check Project. To access the materials for this project, you can visit either of the 2 bit.ly links at the top of this screen or the QR codes. The first one shows the teacher guide, which I will show you more in detail in a moment. It contains instructions for what the students will be doing in the Vibe Check project each day, as well as what the teacher is also going to need to do. The other thing you're going to need for this project is at the other QR code on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the blank poster worksheet, and I will also show you that in a moment. The duration of this Vibe Check project is approximately 8 instructional days, but we only did it about half the class period each day. And just note that Aiken is on a double block, so we have a total of about 90 minutes in our class period. And so each day we would come in and we would do some math first, and then we would end class about 20 or 30 minutes of SEL with this Vibe Check. The goal of the Vibe Check project was to improve student motivation. It was also to learn the science behind creating better habits, and also for students just to become more aware of the effects that their negative behaviors can have on the whole classroom. So we used this when I started to notice a lack of motivation, and it was increasing. That lack of motivation was getting worse and worse every single day, and I was noticing more heads down. I was noticing a lot more people avoiding their work. I was noticing a lot more of my students failing their assignments and then getting a failing class grade because of it. And then the outcome of this project is that students will have a better understanding of what it takes to improve upon things that they keep messing up on, including lack of motivation, by creating better habits. So we started the project by talking about motivation, and then we kind of ended the next half of the project by talking about better habits and how to make them. So this is the teacher guide for the Vibe Check project. And the first part of this guide is just showing you the student directions. So I'm just going to take you step by step how a student would complete this work. And then I will show you what their finished poster is going to be looking like, as well as a few examples. One example of my own teacher-made project, as well as a couple student examples. So on the first day of the Vibe Check project, we started out by every student took a sticky note, and they were instructed to write down one thing that negatively impacts their motivation. And they could leave it anonymous. They didn't have to write their name on it. And then they posted the sticky note on the whiteboard, and at the end of the day, we had a whole whiteboard full of things that were really negatively impacting our motivation. After that sticky note, so that probably took about 5-10 minutes. After that sticky note, we created a list with the whole class involved. We created a list of procedures, routines, rules, norms, just things that we have in the classroom to attempt to create a safe and motivated learning environment. And then we kind of discussed how do things that we have to follow and that we sometimes kind of either ignore or take for granted, how do those things actually strive to help keep us motivated? In day 2 of this project, we watched a video, and the links are going to be provided to you in this document. So that video was just an example of an out-of-control class, and students were instructed to answer those questions that follow. So which students were being self-sufficient, which students were motivated to learn, what the teacher's reaction was, what you think the students in the video are learning, and then we discussed the answers to those questions as a whole class. So this video is 48 seconds long, and you can always feel free to look into it in more depth, but I'm just going to show you a little bit of how that video looked now. In day 3, students watched another video. This time it was 8.5 minutes long of a man talking about the psychology of habits. And this video is kind of speedy. He talks really fast through it. So I made sure that students slowed down the video a little bit. They changed the playback speed to, I think, about 0.75 to make sure they kind of caught more information. And then the only instruction they had there was to jot down any notes that they thought were important or relevant to themselves. The second part of day 3, students had to talk about what a habit was and how can one bad habit change your entire brain. And the big piece was talking about how a change of environment can help you break a bad habit. So all of those questions in the second part of day 3 are talked about in that 8.5 minute video, and we discussed it in groups and then as a whole class. Day 4 of the Vibe Check project is where it took hold for students getting more and more interested in what we were doing. And we kind of switched gears a little bit. So we began talking about motivation in the beginning of the project, and by the middle of the project, students were more involved in habit forming. So the first step that they did was get into their assigned groups, and they figured out one bad habit that every single student in that group shared. And they had to share that habit. They had to all have that bad habit. And then the next step was for those students to discuss how they could make changes to the environment in which their bad habit occurred. So maybe they always came to class and just immediately pulled out their cell phone. So maybe the environment was just the fact that they were walking into the same classroom over and over, or getting to the same desk over and over, or being at the same school over and over. So that was the challenging part, was figuring out if you are kind of almost stuck in an environment and if you have no choice, what else can you do about your current environment to change things up and make it so you could create a new habit. So for example, maybe you could ask a teacher to move your seat, and that would be a slightly different environment than compared to when you were coming straight into class, going straight to the same desk and getting on your phone. Another change in environment maybe could be handing the teacher your cell phone every time you enter class. And these weren't really things that I was suggesting to them. It was things that they were coming up with on their own. So that was a big piece of it, was that they were making decisions about how they could change their environment in order to be successful in breaking a bad habit. The next thing they had to do was discuss with the group what a better habit might be to replace the old bad habit. So instead of walking into class and going directly on your cell phone, hopefully coming into class and starting the class starter. And finally, another step of creating a better habit is figuring out what routines and rewards you're going to be using. So it's important for a student or anyone to be involved in some kind of routine so that they can practice that habit over and over. And then when students successfully achieve the goal for the day, for example, walking into class and starting the class starter instead of getting on their phone, then they would be rewarded either by themselves or by someone that they had agreed with that would reward them. On day 5, students broke into their individual work, and instead of speaking with their groups about what bad habit they shared, they thought by themselves what bad habit they had and wanted to break. So they answered all the same questions again as in day 4, but this time individually. In day 6, we discussed a quote as a class, basically talking about when you lose control of yourself, you are also easily manipulated. And that was just kind of to warm our brains up with SEL that day. And then the next step was to just find, create, or take a picture that represented that student. And a lot of my 7th graders were not comfortable with having a picture of themselves on their poster. So a lot of them engaged in either drawing a really cool picture or finding like a cartoon or just something that represented them, that they felt really meant something and showed something about them. During day 7, students were completing the vibe check poster, which I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. There is an opportunity for students who got finished early. There is a 15-minute video about motivation. And I also had students with extra time consider making their own motivational video for extra credit. I don't think anyone got to creating their own motivational video, but there were a few that did get to watch that 15-minute video. At the end of the project, I had students pass around the vibe check posters, and so they just stayed at their seats, and we had the mini posters that were all finished. I actually put them in sheet protector sleeves, taped them off, so that way students, if we were passing them around and they were eating or drinking, nothing really got on the posters. And so they were able to pass them around and discuss them in groups, discuss them as a whole class, and students were reminded that it was not something to create drama over. Students with the posters, their answers were very open, so it wasn't anything to make fun of them about. And then along with that, we also talked about our responses all the way back from day 1. So I made another visual, which I can show you in a moment, which shows all the day 1 responses about things that negatively impact our motivation. And then the goal was to figure out kind of what is relevant to you. So what was relevant to the individual student from what other people had said. And then what trends do we notice in our school about habits and motivation. This is what a blank vibe check poster looks like. So remember, the first step was for a student to just find a picture that represents them. And it could be a drawing, it could be a photograph, it could be a printed out picture. Anything that they can put right here in this box, and that box is about 3 inches by 3 inches. And then they start filling out the first column and then the second column. So it's basically the questions that were asked in day 4 and day 5 of the project. They're just kind of putting all together into a poster. So the student has to list their bad habit. They want to replace it with some new, better habit. In the other column, they can say what their environmental triggers are. What do they think is happening around them to make them continue that bad habit? And then they'll talk about a reward they'll give themselves when they actually do replace a bad habit with a good habit on certain days. And then they can answer how this might improve their motivation. And at the bottom of the poster, I allowed them to either check yes or no if they want other students to see their poster, because some of this stuff was super personal and they were being super open. So I didn't want to force them to show the whole world what their poster looked like. This is my finished vibe check poster, and I did include a picture of myself on there. And my bad habit was watching TikTok for hours instead of going to sleep. I wanted to replace that habit with going to sleep when I'm tired instead of sitting there on TikTok. I had a lot of environmental triggers, which some of them were happening inside in my brain or in my heart, which I just included as environmental triggers. But really, the external factors are things that you are mainly looking to change in order to change the habit. So I listed their stress and anxiety, coffee, if I drink coffee, boredom, interesting, funny people in the world. Certain spots of my house also trigger me to get on TikTok. Also, the way I'm sitting or laying might make me feel like kind of lazy, and it will make me want to get on TikTok. My mood, and then also the moods of people around me. So if I am successful one day in going to bed instead of watching TikTok, the reward I will give myself when I do the better habit is go to a store and just buy a little something for myself. There's a lot of things that students could write in the last section. I just said this will improve my motivation by changing my brain chemistry to set and meet more difficult goals in the future. So that was kind of a complex one, but some people just said that this will improve my motivation by helping me be happier, or helping me see that I really can achieve something. Student example number 1 was an example of a good finished project. So this person is a pretty intrinsically motivated student, and they have a lot of good habits already, and they have a lot of self-reflection, and they really know themselves. So they said that their bad habit is always being mad at people for no reason. And they want to replace that bad habit with trying to have good reasons to be good with people. On the other side, they said that their environmental triggers are when someone brings up something random out of nowhere and the student does not want to hear it. The reward that this student is going to give themselves is just that they feel good inside because they knew that they needed to change, and then they were successful with that change. So they don't even have an external reward, they'll just feel good inside. And then the student said it will improve their motivation if they do change this habit by just trying to stay chill, because when they're mad, they stay mad, and it just happens kind of for no reason. So it's just going to improve the student's mood and motivation as well. I did also want to show you student example number 2 here, because this student really did a poster that I was not looking for. So this is an example of some common answers that you will get, and this is basically a student not really understanding the goals of this SEL assignment. So this student, you can see they represented themselves with a Sonic picture, and their bad habit is that they play computer games too much. But then the student said they want to replace playing computer games with playing mobile games instead. The student said that their environmental triggers are their desk and then their mood. So maybe just being at their desk, and then the moods that they feel inside. But the reward that the student said they will give themselves if they change from playing computer games to playing mobile games is that they will play Roblox, which I believe is maybe only a computer game and not a phone game. I could be wrong about that. And this will improve my motivation by not playing PC as much. So basically, this student was very specific in what type of games he was bad about playing, and that he wanted to play some different types of games instead. So in my eyes, he really missed the point of this assignment, because I was looking more for maybe instead of playing games too much, maybe he could be doing work more, or maybe he could be spending time with friends more, or something like that. So in my eyes, the student missed the point of the assignment, but there was no reprimand for that. So he didn't really lose any points. He wasn't yelled at about his project or anything like that. So this was from day one when students answered on sticky notes, what negatively impacts your motivation? And I collected all the sticky notes and then I put them into this Canva graphic, and it just kind of looks like texting back and forth, like maybe with a group chat. And so I'm not going to read all these responses to you, but these were all the different responses. People talked about laziness, their ego, things that classmates were doing, things that other people around them were doing, their attitude. So many of the things that impact students' motivation and lack of motivation is something that's happening inside of them, in their brain or in their heart, and or something that is happening on the outside, some kind of social interaction. And those were the main things that were impacting a student's lack of motivation. So you can see that for SEL activities, those are tackling things that will help students with getting more motivated to learn. The next project that we tried this year took place in March, and we called it the Struggle is Real project. And at the top of my screen, if you want to visit the bit.ly links or the QR codes, those are the specific materials that you need for this project. On the left-hand side, I have the teacher guide, which I will show you in more detail in a moment. It contains instructions for the students as well as what the teacher needs to do. And then on the right-hand side, I have a list of 100 coping skills that I created using a bunch of resources online, as well as just kind of ideas I came up with. So for the duration of this project, we took about 10 class days to complete it. And just like the previous project, we took only a little bit of time at the end of class to work on SEL each day. So once again, we would start with math in the beginning of class, and then we would end about 20 to maybe like 40 minutes at the end of class to do this SEL project. So the goals for students in this project were to learn coping skills to help get through a variety of struggles. So not only did we talk about what they were struggling with, but also how they could cope in certain problems and situations. So this project should be used anytime after you've started to get to know your students and some of the problems that they are facing. And then the outcome of this project is you will start to notice more coping skills popping up everywhere, including in conversations that students are having. And then students will kind of need to fine-tune learning about how those coping skills are only appropriate in certain situations. So for example, some students will start coming to school in sunglasses and wearing blankets, and in some classes or in some situations that's not super appropriate or not even allowed. So students will really need to fine-tune those coping skills and learn which environments they can use them in. So now I'll show you what the teacher guide looks like for the Struggle is Real project. On day one, all students did was take a scrap piece of paper and write down one thing that they were struggling with. It could be in school, it could be outside of school, anything at all that they were having a problem with. And they left these papers anonymous, so they didn't write their names on it. And then they crumpled those scrap papers into a ball and put them into a little trash can that I had we called it the Struggles trash can. Before day two took place, I made sure to read through all those struggles and organize them into a document so that way we could read them as a class and analyze them. And again, they were anonymous, so no one really knew who was struggling with what. So then students were provided a worksheet of those struggles, and they were able to circle or color in all the struggles that they related to. In day three, that was the introduction of coping skills. So we talked about definitions and examples of coping skills. We also looked at a picture and watched a video about definitions and examples of coping skills. And then the next part of the project, days 4 through 8, those were the main days of the project. So students, once again, were thinking about their struggles and thinking about what coping skills are. And then they were introduced to a list of 100 coping skills. And this is what that list looks like. After students took a look at those 100 coping skills and were still thinking about the struggles that students were dealing with in our school, they were then instructed to create a presentation that basically gives advice to a struggling student. So they would pick one coping skill from that list, and they would pick one struggle and make sure that they match up, make sure that it's appropriate advice for that struggle and for that environment, and then create some kind of presentation to give advice to that struggling student. And there is a rubric available in case you want to grade in specific areas for that project and for the presentation. But once again, this really was for the students and not for me. So I didn't grade super harshly or anything. As long as students picked a coping skill and a struggle, then they basically got full credit. For students with extra time, they were allowed to come up with their own list of coping skills, and they had to be different from those 100 coping skills that were provided to them before. And then they had to answer the question, how does sharing advice and coping skills with a classmate who is struggling allow you to practice empathy? And that is one of our big goals with SEL, is bringing empathy to light and talking about it and modeling it so that students learn what it is and how to do it and why it's important. After we created our final presentations, we watched them and looked at them as a class. And some students came up in front of the room and presented things and told us things. And then students were able to share with us from the audience what they related to, what they found interesting. And then at the end of the project, there was a survey. The last page of the teacher guide shows you what materials you need. Make sure that all the links are working. It reminds you to create your own struggle project, and I'll show you the one that I created in a moment. And just remember to be open and relatable when you are creating your project. Try and be as transparent as possible, because that's really where the students will start to connect with the project and with you. I did provide the link to the post-project survey, but you can feel free to create your own or use mine for ideas, or just copy mine completely. And then a couple reminders of you need to remember to put the instructions somewhere, either post them on the Learning Management website or print them out for students. And then also after day one of the project, or during day one, you need to take all those struggles from the little struggle trash can that you had and organize them into some kind of document. And you have to make sure to do that before day two. And then students will also use that struggle list as they move through the project. Now I'll show you the video that I created as my own presentation for the Struggle is Real project. And I had to remember to be open and relatable so that the students would connect with what their presentation should look like and the depth of the presentation. And I presented this video on day 4 when students were right about to start preparing their own presentations. When I get overwhelmed with my responsibilities or emotions, I grab one of my favorite foods and drinks. I go to one of my favorite parks. I walk or bike or skate. I breathe deep enough to stretch out the muscles in my stomach. And I force myself to smile at everyone I pass, even if I'm not happy or not in the mood. Finally, I'll show you an example of a student's presentation that went above and beyond to take a struggle and a coping skill and put them together for a piece of advice.
Today, I'll be going over me struggles and how I cope with them.
Throughout kind of most of my life I've been insecure about my art, even nowadays. Sometimes I felt it wasn't worth being considered art. Over those years I've recently got better at doing art. As you see on the background, as it goes further you will start to see older art from 2001 or 2020. Some of the things I did to help myself or cope with me insecurities will be shown in text and visuals. As you can see, I'm listing YouTubers that have helped me with my insecurities. How did they help? Well, because often I've felt inspired to do more, which can also help others to getting better who also feel as I do. Never doubt yourself when it comes to things you love. Everyone is different and that's what makes you unique. Have a good day equals. By the way, if you want to follow me on my Instagram to look at my future drawings, here's my name equals at Slamix or at Lavisart.
The next project I want to talk to you about is the class mediation packet that we did. So if you want the QR codes for that project specifically, the first one is for the teacher's guide, which I'll show you in a moment. And then the next one I'll show you is the blank mediation packet. So the duration for this packet was approximately 3 whole instructional days, and Aiken is on a double block, so we have 90-minute class periods. But depending on the conversations that arise from the work in this packet, the project could potentially take a lot longer, but it really just depends on what you guys talk about during these little SEL sessions and how long you really have to teach it. So if you need to cut the packet short, it can always be sent home with students for homework, and they can do it individually at home. The goals of this project is that students should learn steps that can be taken to move forward after experiencing a problem with either another peer or maybe an adult. And I suggest using this packet when you notice drama starting to happen in the classroom or throughout the school. And also when everyone in the school seems kind of burnt out and frustrated with each other. We used this about April of this year, so it was closer to the end of the year. The outcome of this project is that students will realize that they're not the only ones going through a tough situation and struggles. And the classroom is going to start feeling more tight-knit as people begin to open up about their problems and also suggest solutions to others. So the teacher guide for the class mediation packet project is not super long. The only thing you really need to do is set up the materials. So you'll need some writing utensils, you'll need coloring supplies, you'll need student devices, either a phone or a laptop or iPad or whatever, to look up some music information, and then the printed and stapled blank class mediation packets. And this is what one of those looks like. And all of these pages in this packet were actually found on Canva and were slightly adapted just to fit the needs of my own classroom better. So I suggest if you're interested in materials such as this one, you can look on Canva and just go to the template section, and you'll be able to just search SEL. It will show you a bunch of templates and worksheets and things that go along with social emotional learning. That was the title page, and I defined mediation for the students as basically just help in solving a problem between peers or even sometimes with a student and an adult. The first page was meant for students to just vent about anything they were frustrated with, and I did write at the top that it's things that have been happening at school, but really we opened up to anywhere. The next page involves 3 balloons, and students were instructed to write in each balloon one thing that they want to let go of. And I told students that sometimes maybe if something happens and you have a problem with someone or you have an issue, that sometimes it's really hard to forgive that person and it's really hard to forget what happened, but you do need to move forward with your life. You can't just sit there and hate that person and never ever do anything. You have to kind of move forward and continue your own life. So after hearing that, the students were writing 3 things, at least 3 things, that they wanted to let go of and move on from. This next page was really engaging for students. They were able to use their device to start looking up songs, and this created a custom coping playlist. So in each box, there's a little prompt, like the first one is a song that stays stuck in your head when you hear it, and whatever the song title and artist was, the student would write down in that box. The next page is the gratitude jar. So this was kind of one of the almost like cheesier pages because sometimes when you're writing down things that you're grateful for, it just kind of seems dumb. But students were learning about how you can sit there and write this down one time, and I guess that's fine. But if you make a habit of every time you're going through something and you sit there and list 5 things or a list of things that you are grateful for, it can help improve your outlook and your mood over time. The next page was all about self-talk. So all students learned that they all talk to themselves. And at first they were kind of thinking, oh, only crazy people do that, or only a certain type of people do that. But then they kind of realized that every person talks to themselves in some way. So if they ever heard of someone talking in the mirror, like hyping themselves up or giving themselves a pep talk, that would be an example of self-talk. On each petal, students had to write something that they liked about themselves or something that they were good at. And then on the next page, it looks exactly the same, but this time they were talking about their peers. So they had to say something that their peers were good at or that they liked about someone else. On the last page, interviewing a classmate was meant to help students look at things from another student's perspective. So a student would pick someone to interview, and that was really important because I didn't want to force them to pair up with some person that they really didn't get along with, even though that would kind of create maybe a good situation to hear that student's opinions and feelings. I just wanted them to be comfortable in this situation. So I let the students pick who they teamed up with, who they got to interview. And then they asked the question, when was the last time you wanted something but did not get it? Explain in detail what you wanted and what happened to prevent you from getting it. So then they had to hear that person's story and basically just write down what they thought their classmate was feeling at the time and what the classmate could have done better or what they did do well. The last project that we did involving SEL during the school year was called our praise door. And this actually came from the previous project, the page in the class mediation packet where students had to write on each petal of a flower one thing they liked about another student or one thing that that other student was good at. So some of the answers were so good and so detailed, which was actually very surprising to me. I kind of thought that some students would just be just very surface level, just very like bland compliments, but they actually, a lot of them used strong details. So we created a whole classroom door design from that, and the picture is a little bit small, but in the middle of the door you can see a field of flower cutouts that each cutout has a compliment or something that one student liked about someone else at our school. And in this case, it could have been another student or a staff member. So if you want access to the flower cutouts that we used, it was basically just a Google Doc with a flower shape in it. You can go to that QR code or that bit.ly link at the top of the screen, or you could easily just buy flower cutouts. That would be much easier than sitting there and cutting them all out. The duration of this door, it took about 5 to 7 hours, and we did not use any class time for this other than advisory, but we did use some lunch times as well as did a little bit of work after school. So it's really whenever you can find time to work on the door, that's kind of when we did it. It took about a week to get in that 5 to 7 hours, so we were just over the course of a week adding more and more to the door each day. The goal of this project was really to just improve our school's culture by focusing on the positive. We noticed that there was a lot of negativity going around and a lot of complaining, and so we just wanted to do kind of something nice for the school. We used this at the end of the year when everyone was very tired and burnt out, but also when everyone knows each other really well and knows what everyone's strengths are. The outcome of this project, there are a lot of different outcomes, but one that I wanted to focus on is that students who initially thought the activity was cheesy or stupid actually started to engage in the project once they realized they actually liked someone at school. So they would sit there for a few minutes and I would say, just sit there and think. And then eventually they would come up with a person they did like at school and something very specific. And some of the people who were initially complaining about this project came up with the best ideas to write on their flower cutouts. After we put up our door, we invited the whole staff and the whole school to come look at our door whenever they want. And so another outcome is that students and staff will gather at your door and look for their names and read others' praise. The first mini lesson that I want to show you is talking about how do students want to be treated by teachers. So my students came into the room and I asked them the question, how do you want adults and teachers to treat you? And then if they were kind of stuck on that question or having a little bit of trouble figuring it out, I also gave them the questions to lead them up to their answers. How can teachers help you? What do you want teachers to know about you? What should teachers keep in mind about kids? And what advice can you give to next year's teachers? And then this is what we came up with. So all of these different colored boxes here are different responses from students. And you can pause the video if you want to read each individual response. But in general, a lot of students talked about they didn't want to be yelled at. They didn't feel like they were being respected, but they really wanted that respect from adults. And the last thing is that students really wanted us to realize that they were still just kids and they make mistakes and they're growing up and they're really just not as mature or as old as they act sometimes. So they want to be treated almost as an adult, but they also want you to know that they are still kids and they are still figuring things out. The next SEL lessons, I did not get to use these in the classroom this year, but students had picked them out and I had picked them out to go along with a lot of these activities that we did accomplish. And so I just wanted to share with you a list of additional resources that you might also want to incorporate in your lessons and in your projects. So the first one is called Empathy in Your Classroom. The second one is called Happiness Certificates. The third one is deciding whether a situation is mindful or not mindful. The next one is talking about being in the present moment. And then the last one, this bit.ly link here, is 51 different lessons about mindfulness while in the classroom. So you can access all of these additional resources, all the PDFs, all the websites and everything in this additional resources part. So you can either go to the QR code or the bit.ly link. So throughout this training, you may be sitting there thinking okay, this is great. These are good projects and these are good lessons and they look really good on paper, but my students are never ever going to do this. And it will be very frustrating and I will be forcing them and they'll still not do it. So I wanted to talk about my favorite part, which is student buy-in, because this is the most challenging part, but then also the most fun part once students actually are convinced to do the work. So my first piece of advice to get students to really buy in and be motivated to do these SEL activities with you is to just make sure that you yourself, you get as personal and relatable as possible. So when I did my Vibe Check challenge, I made sure to pick a funny picture. I made sure to talk about TikTok because those are all things that I knew my students would like to see and would like to hear about because they would be able to relate to that. And that was a side of me that they hadn't really seen in the classroom. So even when it is outside of your comfort zone to be discussing things that you are struggling with or talking about things that happen outside of school or things that your students might not know about, it is important for you to create your own SEL presentations right alongside your students so that way they can see your openness and that they will kind of feed off of that. And generally, students will feel more connected to you once you do open up like that and show them different sides that they have not seen and things that you're struggling with. And students will also be more trusting and open to sharing their own experiences. One category of students are the unmotivated students, and those are the ones that are saying, I don't want to do this, or they have their head down, or they have their phone out, or they have a very blank face, or an angry face. So you can remind these students that this is not busy work. I frequently say almost every single day, and sometimes multiple times per day during an SEL project, that this isn't for me, this is for you. So I remind my students, I'm not trying to take anything out of this, but I do want you to take something away from this. So that way it helps you and helps you be a better person and a better student. The next category of students that you are going to be dealing with when trying to get students to buy in is disruptive students. So those students that are just sitting there and talking over you or talking over other presenters. And the important thing for those students is that you remind them that this activity was created specifically for them and for this problem. And most of the time, the student knows that they are generally disruptive and they know that they have that habit. And they do kind of, even if it's in the back of their mind, they do kind of want to change that about themselves. So for disruptive students, I remind them that when they cause a disruption or when they're disrespectful, that I typically, if it was a normal day, I would send them out of the room. But since the activity is specifically designed to help tackle the issues that they're currently facing, I want them to be a part of it. The last thing about student buy-in is that you really need to try not to get frustrated when these things don't work. So even when you go around the room and remind the students that this work is not for me, that it is for them, when you remind them that they will be sent out of the room in normal circumstances, but you're giving them another chance because it's a special SEL activity, even when all that occurs, you're still going to have those students who are tired that day or hate the project or whatever it may be. And it's really important not to get frustrated when an SEL activity is occurring. And if you do get frustrated, and of course there were those days where I was very stressed out and frustrated about a disruptive situation going on, I would just make sure to be open about that situation and let them know, hey, I'm trying to help you. And just over and over again, making sure that they know that this project is supposed to be supporting them and helping them get through school and helping them grow up, and it's not about me at all. The other thing you need to keep in mind when doing SEL activities in your classroom and promoting them throughout the school, such as our classroom door where we're putting our SEL on display, is that there are some adults in the school building who will be pushing back. So the first thing you need to keep in mind is that not every adult's philosophy is to educate the child as a whole. There are a lot of staff in CPS who are really just focused on content area, and that is the traditional way of thinking, of just teaching one subject or two subjects or how many ever subjects you teach, and only teaching those skills and not worrying about anything related to social issues or emotional issues. And at that point, the belief is sometimes that the parents should be taking care of all of that or most of that, and that we're just in charge of the content area. In other cases, some staff members are going to just be super uncomfortable with SEL or don't even know where to start. And if you are in that situation, I hope that this presentation is helping you out a little bit, either showing you direct examples of projects or giving you your own ideas of what to do to start working with your students with SEL. You need to remember that SEL is evidence-based and that you're not alone in your SEL efforts, and they are increasing post-pandemic. There is definitely a spotlight on SEL right now and what it can do. So my advice is that you find other staff in your school, they could be anywhere in your school building, who share your interest in SEL and who are already supporting efforts to improve school culture. And staff practicing SEL are easy to spot because they speak and act calmly, they get the whole story, they advocate for kids, and sometimes they put in extra time with kids, including spending time after school or spending time during lunch. And there's a lot of other things that you will notice about staff that are practicing SEL. So this quote is from Castle, which is a major leader in SEL activities. And it says teachers who report higher levels of well-being reported engaging in SEL practices to a greater extent than those with lower reported well-being. So this quote is really another motivator if you are feeling like SEL is going to be taking away time from your classroom. It is really trying to support the well-being of everyone involved. It's trying to support you as the educator, as well as supporting the students with the problems that are preventing them from getting that education. So this next slide is just kind of a list of future work that I will be engaging in. And so if you want some next steps, you could also maybe be looking in these directions as well. The first one is in the 2022-2023 school year and beyond, there are going to be additions to our school mental health team as well as health teams around the district. So for example, we are going to be having a second social worker next year. We will be doing more involvement with PBIS for positive behaviors. Our psychologists are being trained in dialectical behavior therapy. And I do know that the district is also looking for additional mental health supports for schools as a whole. The next thing is called community-based accountability, and this one is basically just making sure that the community outside of the school, so companies and parents and everything outside of the education system, has goals that are aligned within the schools in order to ensure that everyone's goals align and that students are properly prepared for the future. The next future work on my list is that we should be looking at what other schools have had success with and then use that as kind of a model for our own schools. So at the beginning of this presentation, when I was quoting Principal Bill Waters from San Angelo School District in Texas, he actually did suggest that his own school district needs to be looking at what schools are doing successfully, what are they doing to improve behaviors and doing to improve student outlooks. And my question is there any school in the country that is actually thriving after the pandemic, and what are they implementing that we are not? The next thing on my list of future things to do is after we use SEL for a while, so longer than basically just half a year, which is what I did this year, I want to be analyzing the academic data. So for example, I want to be looking at my MAP scores for math and seeing if there's any growth or any trends that might be related to the SEL work that we are doing. And then my last thing on my future to-do list is just to continue to find, build, and teach meaningful SEL lessons and projects for my students. And these are some future ideas on what I would be building or finding to do more projects and lessons involving SEL. So like I mentioned before, CASEL is one of the leaders in SEL. So they have provided a program guide, which is a bunch of different lessons and projects and resources that teachers have made, that other people have made, and they're all at that first link. And CASEL stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. The next idea that I would like to use in the future is called positive action lessons, and those are 37 different SEL activities and games separated by age range. Many of my middle school students took a look at the 37 activities on that list, and they were very intrigued. They really wanted to do them, but we just never got the chance to use most of them. My 7th graders specifically requested to hold class meetings and to also have something called a Yay Day, where you go around and you talk about something that you like about a person or a compliment. So it was kind of similar to the praise door and the peer praise that we did. The next idea that I have for SEL activities that can be done in the future are actually certifications about mental health through the CDC. And if you're interested in those, some of them are free, some of them are pretty cheap, around like $15, $20. And those are just simple trainings that you can go through to better understand things involving mental health, and then you'll actually be certified in those areas through the CDC. The next link that I provided is the mental health first aid training, and this training is actually provided through CFT's recent emails. So they've offered several youth first aider trainings during the 2021-22 school year, and I completed the course, and I'm actually now a certified first aider. In the course, it was very beneficial. You'll learn how to support a child with a mental health challenge. They also talk about substance abuse challenges in this training. And basically, a first aider is supporting that student and being there for that student while they wait for mental health professionals to arrive, just as if you were to provide someone with CPR while you waited for the ambulance to arrive. The last idea that I have for future work is just to follow teachers on TikTok, and there are a couple different ones that I already follow, and so I'll keep up with them just to find teachers that are already doing SEL, because it is really important to watch how they're speaking, what tones they're using, what words they're saying, how they're interacting with their kids. It's really important to watch them kind of model that for you and see what type of interactions SEL is really known for. Two TikTokers that I follow right now are called Maddie Richardson and Dave Rodriguez, and I have included two videos that I want you to see.
From one teacher to another, let's talk about helping our students build good habits. Over the summer, I read the book Atomic Habits. I'm going to say habits an excessive number of times during this video, so please just bear with me. And it's a fantastic book. Then I tried to bring it into the classroom, and this is what that looks like. I start off by talking about how a habit is a behavior on repeat, and a habit is evidence of who you are. So if you have a habit of cleaning up, well, that's evidence that you're an organized person. You're an organized person. If you have a habit of drawing every day and you're constantly doodling, well, that's a behavior on repeat, and you are a creative person. If you have a habit of listening to others, well, you're a respectful person. That is evidence of who you are. Those behaviors on repeat. Now, I love this because it provides an opportunity to talk about effort, and that, you know what, you can be that type of person. If you want to be an organized person, you can be. Just build habits that connect with that. You want to be a respectful person, you can be. Just build habits that connect with that. And how do we build those habits? Well, you start with a goal. The goal isn't the focus, it's just a starting point. Then we say, well, ask what type of person would do that. So let's say when the kid says, I want to read a bunch of books by the end of the year. That's a goal. Well, what type of person would do that? Well, what would they do? Well, the type of person that would do that is someone who is a reader. I want to be a reader. What do readers do? They read every day. Well, let's put that behavior on repeat so that you can be a reader. Every action is a vote for the type of person you want to be. You get home, you read, that's a vote for that type of person. Next day you do it again, another vote. Next day, another vote. And before you know it, you have all this evidence of the type of person you want to be. Guess what? You're a reader now. I love that aspect of it. The other really great thing is that it provided what I call springboard language that lets me jump into conversations a little easier. So for example, let's say I go up to a student and they have been, and I say to them, you were raising your hand, you were waiting for space to talk, you didn't interrupt people, you were talking so kindly to others. All of that is evidence of a respectful person. You are a respectful person, and it focuses on effort. Because of the things that you are doing, because of the effort you are putting in, you know what? You're a respectful person. You can also use it to talk about behaviors that aren't so good. So I saw yesterday that you kept on interrupting when I was talking, and today I saw that you were talking to someone next to you when I was teaching. We don't want that behavior on repeat. That's not the type of person you want to be. Let's break that habit. I know that you can do better. So I really appreciate this book, and I think it's led to a lot of opportunities for me helping my students become the type of people they want to be, the type of people we all want to be. So happy teaching and have a great day.
That you do not have to attend every argument that you are invited to. And if you are arguing with someone that you love, the goal should never be to win. It should be to find peace and to solve a problem. And if you're arguing to win against someone that you love, you can bet that you're probably going to lose part of your relationship with that person. And if you were bad at that before, or no one told you that you didn't have to participate in every argument that you were invited to, I forgive you. You're allowed to make mistakes and learn and grow from them. But it is your job to help me make the world a better place. So as you move forward, remember that unless you're finding a solution, the one who shouts the loudest is usually the greatest fool. And also remember that it's okay to start over, because today is a new day with a new opportunity to make your world a better place to be.
So that concludes my presentation about modifying mindsets in middle school and hopefully grade levels above that. If you would like to reach out to me with any SEL questions, you can contact me at my email address. And I hope after watching this presentation that you feel either a little bit more comfortable with SEL and what it might look like in your classroom, as well as I hope that I have provided some materials that can help you get started or help you continue SEL activities with your students.